So I knew what was happening. I knew people were falling over after being jabbed. I knew they'd faked COVID death numbers.
Really?
Yeah, so it was obvious the correlation was there. I've been doing it for 18 years. I know who should die and when. I worked for the coroner for 7 years on body recovery. I've sat through hundreds of post-mortems, yet when I open up deceased that they have post-mortemed, none of them have any of this normal pathology in.
So have they been removed? Do you believe that COVID was brought in intentionally?
The vaccines were never about COVID. COVID was about the vaccines. I knew that they'd faked COVID deaths and monetized it, and I knew people only fell over when needles went in arms.
People still are of the opinion of what the mainstream mothers told them. What do you think has got to happen for those people to understand?
There's no question in my mind what's going to happen. And at some point they will come for us again with injections.
Yes,
they're coming.
There is a second pre-planned pandemic coming.
Yeah, there is.
Hi guys, today's episode is a very special one. I'm joined by John O'Looney, an undertaker who spent the pandemic years on the front lines of the funeral industry, witnessing firsthand the human cost of the most disruptive period in modern history. Whilst caring for the dead and supporting grieving families during COVID, John began raising questions about what he observed, and he was one of the few willing to speak honestly about it early on. He's gone on to become a heroic COVID whistleblower, sharing his experiences across independent media and mainstream media in conversations with figures including Robert F. Kennedy, who is now the US Secretary for Health under President Donald Trump. To have him here on Society 2.0 is a real honour, as we explore the forces that shape our reality and the courage it takes to question powerful, false narratives and simply tell the truth, a heroic act in deceitful times. In those regards alone, John is a hero for humanity who should be listened to very, very carefully. John, welcome to the show.
So for me, life changed really in September of 2021. So I knew what was happening. I knew people were falling over after being jabbed. I knew they'd faked COVID death numbers.
How did you know that?
Simply because I keep a wall planner that counts the funerals. It's not rocket science. And the other thing was the rollout. The way they rolled it out, if you cast your mind back while we were watching the TikTok dancing nurses who were overrun. And
literally on here to ask you.
And they were monetizing, so every time COVID went on a death certificate, they monetized it. Why would you do that? That makes absolutely no sense. They rolled out the jabs and they said, it's only the over 80s, the most vulnerable. And then they moved the goalposts and they said, oh, actually, the over 70s. And then 4 weeks later, they say, oh, the over 60s. And then the over 50s, if you've got hypertension. And if you're a parent in your 40s, you need looking after. And as they went down that list, that was who I was booking in my mortuary book.
Really?
Yeah, so it was obvious the correlation was there. I've been doing it for 18 years. I know who should die and when.
So to clarify for the audience, as they expanded the group of people,
as they went down the age demographic, that was who was dying from the COVID.
So you saw a direct correlation
correlation. That was why I started shouting, saying it's very wrong.
Wow.
It's not, it's not rocket science, is it? You ain't got to be Professor Dolores Cahill or a Dr. Tess Lorry or Dr. Sukrit Bhakti, of whom all of I've spoken to. You don't have to be them to see that correlation directly. And then not only that, but I think what upset me the most was not the fact that I saw it happening, but the reaction from the people who are paid to take care of us. And they all know. So they all know. I've spoken to many of them off record. They know. It's not.
Can you tell us about some of those conversations you've had off record? No need to name names.
Doctors, nurses.
It's just audiences won't know this.
One person in London rung me up, runs 7 funeral homes. She said she sees it clearly. They know. I've had people tap me on the shoulder at the local crematorium, the next funeral provider, who said, "Oh, I saw your latest video. Well done. Thank you for speaking out." And I'm like, "All right."
Thank you for speaking out, but they didn't.
Yeah. Well, I'll say, that's great. What about you speaking out? And they look at the floor and they shuffle their feet. Oh, it's difficult, isn't it? I had a conversation. So I get a lot of people are realizing now, because the truth, holding back the truth is like holding a football underwater in a swimming pool. All these lads will have done it, and hopefully even you at some point. You can do it.
It takes
a lot of effort, but eventually it's got to surface.
And the longer it takes, the more
Yeah,
effort
of
it
course it
takes,
is.
the more hindsight you have.
So I'll give you an idea of the
great
sort
analogy.
of conversations that I have. I had a guy ring me up, a woman ring me up several weeks ago. She said, my dad was killed by the vaccines in the care home. I told him not to vaccinate him. They did anyway, and he's dead. I would like you, I'm based in Gloucester. She said, I would like you to pick him up from Gloucester, bring him to you, you embalm him. Tell me if you see any clots and retain samples whilst you're embalming him, and then return him back to Gloucester. So that's cool. I can do that.
But what a conscientious relative.
Yeah, of course. Well, I think they know, and they know there is no one else they can trust to have an honest look and say, look, here you go, here's the pathology. And I was very clear with her, and I said, there's no guarantee I will find it, because I'm finding it in like 30% of all deceased at the minute that haven't been post-mortemed, and that's very important. So these are people that have not had a post-mortem, have white fibrous clots inside their arteries. And the way that works is when we embalm someone, we hook up a pump and we cut halfway through the carotid artery, and then we put an L-shaped nozzle in and we tie it off to clamp it, and we pump formaldehyde around the body. Whilst we do that, a trocar goes into the heart and it draws away the blood that's drained away. So very slowly, you're getting a transference. I do apologise.
That's all right. Feel free
You're
to
getting
do
a
it.
transference of fluid throughout that body, and the fluid is pink. So when they're fully embalmed, you can see the fingertips are pink, and that one isn't. So you know this arm is embalmed.
Oh, wow.
Now, if you picture it, when you pull that pump back out, you've been putting that in under a couple of bar of pressure, or a bar of pressure, whatever it be, 3 or 4 pound. There's a little bit of back pressure. And when we pull that nozzle out, it spits all these out onto the table.
Of course.
And that's how I'm seeing it.
Oh,
But
wow.
more interestingly, whilst I'm seeing 30% of untouched bodies, and I've tackled the coroner about it and said, listen, what is this
I
pathology?
was just about to ask.
So back in 2030, I had a 30-year-old come in who'd been jabbed and he died suddenly. I knew what had killed him. He was built like a Spartan.
Yeah.
You know, he was in good nick. I was 30 once. You're in good nick when you're 30, mate. So I kind of reached out to the coroner and said, listen, we found these samples. This isn't normal pathology. What is it? Do you want a sample? I know he'd been post-mortem because they post-morted him at the coroner's office before they released to me.
Right.
But they hadn't removed it. It was all sitting in him. And we pulled out about 300 grams, I guess. And I can forward you the video footage of that particular guy. And also the still picture.
Sorry, for the benefit of the users at home and the point of this podcast, anything you can send us in supporting info that we can reference for users would be fantastic.
I don't do a 190 mile round trip for nothing to lie.
No,
you know,
exactly.
I will give you the footage.
This isn't about distrusting you. This is for confidence of the users in what you're saying.
People need to listen.
Yes.
They need to listen.
That's what I said in my intro. You should be listening to very carefully.
So I contacted the coroner. I emailed him because I knew what was happening by then, and I wanted a paper trail. And you get that with an email, albeit a digital footprint. They wouldn't reply to the email. They're under instruction not to, but they drop you a phone call 3-4 days.
Because there's no record and paper trail of a phone call.
Unless you're going to record a phone call. Who does that?
GDPR and stuff.
No, the people up there do it. So I kind of said, well, look, this is what I found. And they said, well, it's about your email. It's totally normal pathology. Yeah, so when you die, sometimes rubber grows throughout your arteries. You know, you're like, I worked for the coroner for 7 years on body recovery.
I can't believe you were told that.
Yeah,
although I can, given the insanity.
They didn't know. They thought I was the run-of-the-mill numpty sitting at the cash chain in the funeral business.
I say all the time, I thought you were a regular fish.
I worked for the coroner for 7 years on body recovery. So I was picking people up in bits and pieces, literally bits and pieces. And where you've got a steam cleaning team behind you, and you pick up every bit bigger than half an inch. That's the rule that you have to work to. Right. That's how it happens. So I know what pathology is. I take an interest. I've got the ability to think critically, clearly.
Well, I was going to say, this is the point of this podcast.
I've sat through hundreds of post-mortems and hundreds of embalmings of post-mortem cases. So the way that works is when you're going for a post-mortem, they cut you up the middle, they'll cut your sternum out, they'll clamp you open. They take every organ out, which involves cutting those organs, and they take blocks and slides, they inspect the organs, and the idea is to ascertain the cause of your death, or it used to be. Now they're waving them through. So when they put them back, the organs go back into an orange bin bag, for want of a better word, because that's what it is. It's a hazardous disposal waste. And then they put it back in you, and they'll stitch you back up and they release you to the funeral director. Now, the coroner insisted down the phone to me that the pathology I was finding was totally normal. I find it to this day in 30% of all deceased. Yet when I open up deceased that they have post-mortemed, none of them have any of this normal pathology in.
So have they been removed?
They have to have been removed, mate, because otherwise I would expect to see 20% of it in there.
That is
and
dark.
they said it's normal. Yeah, I don't find any of this normal stuff inside.
So it's contradicting their own claims?
Of course. And if you're going to lie, you have to be clever. If you're stupid and you're panicking, they're panicking. They are panicking. They know they're going to be found out. And I had a conversation, as I alluded to earlier, with a woman who wanted me to embalm my dad and have a look. So just before we actually pulled the trigger and went down to get him picked up, I had a phone call from the funeral director in Gloucester, all right? Now, this funeral director, late 30s, he actually went to school with the woman whose father had died. So they knew each other. She knew him from when he was a child, from when he was a kid, knew what he was about, knew his, he couldn't bullshit her because they grew up together.
Yeah, they've existed
And
relationship.
he's openly admitted to it that they're seeing the clots, openly. So he's on the phone to me, and I'm wondering why he's ringing. Does he just want these? And he said to me, is there really any point? So that was it. I was fucking on him then. So I kind of said, what do you mean, is there any point? Of course there is. This has been going on for 5 years now. People have been dying full of clots. People are now finally realising, and they want fucking answers. How can you not realise that?
Some people.
And he said, yeah, I suppose so. And I had him by the bollocks then, because that's an admission. Yeah. So I said, okay. I said, well, if you know so, I haven't seen you speaking online. Why haven't you said anything? Oh, well, it's difficult, isn't it? And I said to him, how is it difficult? Look at what funeral directors, the responsibility was. Now, I have a duty of care to people, right? Let me explain. If I go to the hospital and I pick someone up and I'm rolling them about and I see a big stab wound in their back with a knife hanging out of it or an area of concern about that cause of death, you get me?
Yep.
I have to raise those concerns. I have to raise those concerns for two reasons. As a man with a moral compass and being a decent fucking human, you would raise those concerns. Here's a guy that could well have been murdered. Or on a legal standpoint, you are legally obliged in law to notify the coroner of any concerns. That's a legal obligation. I'd be breaking the law if I didn't.
This is the reason you don't think you've done anything special when people like me think you're a hero.
But this is where I'm saying is these people have dug themselves a hole now. And I told this funeral director this. I said, because you've known about this for the same length of time as me. You've said nothing. So now when the truth eventually comes out and the football's let go of in this swimming pool, what are you going to say? How are you going to say, well, I've only just seen it 5 years in? They've dug themselves a hole. And the reality is these funeral directors hadn't actually done anything wrong at that time. What would they have done? They'd have said, actually, yes, we're seeing a new pathology. This isn't normal. What is it? That's all they had to say. Yeah. And they chose not to do that. And that's not a normal reaction. That's only done under orders. And most of them are in lodges up and down the country.
Well, this is what I was going to ask you. So is there a chance that they had orders that you did not?
Yeah. So I have something, and this is very interesting because I've seen this develop over time. So initially they all thought I was mad. You know, when I was speaking out about it, they all laughed at me and they mocked me. Now they'll give me a nod. They respect me. You know, and there's because I have something that they don't have. My moral compass and my integrity is intact, and I can meet my maker with a clean conscience. When people talk to my son about me in the future, and they will, my moral compass is intact.
I want to hug you for saying that. Before you got here, we had the same conversation about the soul.
Yeah. It is a spiritual war, and initially I never really understood that. I suppose I did. When I sat in Birdcage Walk in September of 2021, and present at the meeting was people like Sir Graham Brady. Now, Sir Graham is a man who was the commissioner of the 1922 committee. So he's a very senior politician. He leads a commission, the clue's in the name, and they hire and fire prime ministers. So he's 2 pay grades above the prime minister of this country. Now, people are under the impression the prime minister is in charge of things. They're not.
For the benefit of our users, please go into that, because I've been astounded with people's lack of understanding of the forces which govern their existence.
Yeah. There is no democracy. They're
No.
all bought and paid for.
Of course.
And in fact, I've been speaking on the way down here with a member of shall we say, probably one of the most influential families in the world. And they openly admit it. They know. They all know. They all know. And like any family, if you look at your family and that family consists of 20 or 30 members, you'll have a villain in that family. You'll have an arsehole. You'll have someone who's totally on the other end of the scale as you. And it's the same with these big families.
Wow.
Whether you care to admit that, they're no different to any other family. There are good and there are bad factions.
There are black sheep and there are
conformists. Of course there are. There are psychopaths and then there are good souls. And yeah, he's been very open with me and told me how it works. And when politicians are called to ascend, and he told me this probably a couple of years ago, and I'll tell you when it was. Do you remember the time when Elon Musk spoke out and said he didn't think Nigel Farage was the man for the job?
Yeah, I think there was 22 or 3.
And there was a little bit of an uproar and it was brushed over quickly. Let me tell you why that was. When you are chosen to ascend to greatness, you are given a choice. That choice evolves around children. You can either be into children and be given children and have access to children, predominantly from the care sector, because nobody misses them. They're taken from junkie mothers. They're taken from places where there is no one who cares. 8 million kids a year go missing globally. They either have a choice of kids and they're into kids, that's documented, and they've got the leverage on them they need, or you can't force a man who is not a paedophile to rape children. It's just not going to happen. So then you get them financially, and they all love money, and they take payments as directors of companies involved in the trafficking of children. That's the two choices they get. They have to benefit financially from the tracking, or they have to be into kids. Let me explain the business model. If I go onto line to
Please do explain it for users because it's complicated.
Yeah, so I buy shopping from Morrison's. I employ the services of a third-party Ocado. Ocado pick that shopping up. They transfer like that commodity from A to B. The same is done with children. And these people who ascend to greatness are registered with companies in the Cayman Islands and places like that that benefit financially from the trafficking of children. Now, the moment you attend a paedophile party, it's extremely well documented. They've got you by the bollocks. The moment you take the first payment of benefit from the child trafficking after you've agreed, because that's what you need to do to ascend, they've got you by the bollocks. And when you have British MPs, 650, whatever it is, and 2/3 of them vote to retain convicted foreign rapists in this country, that's why.
There's a reason.
And it was asset gatherers like Epstein.
I was just going to say, everything you've just said has been corroborated with the release of the Epstein files, which I'm very, very well informed of.
Whereas the outrage, people are not bothered. They're not bothered. It's a bit like the jab damage, right? Nobody's bothered until they sit down there and they've lost their mum or their dad or their child or their son or their daughter. Then they're really bothered.
I had someone tell me less than 30 minutes before you came into this building that they just don't like thinking about it.
Yeah, that's the reality.
I thought, will when your family start dropping down and buying and losing your freedom,
come to your doorstep
exactly
to take your teenage son to the meat grinder in Ukraine, or to vaccinate under a WHO mandate. And Farage has taken all your human rights, because that's what Farage is there for. They work on a problem solution.
Reaction solution. It's called the Hegelian dialect.
100%. And he is tasked with convincing us of the need to take our human rights and leave the ECHR. That's what it is. And in the background, they've ushered in the pandemic treaty. Bill Gates has been very open. He said, there's another one coming. You'll take notice of this one. And they could
the video when he grinned at the end.
Could they? You remember the one where he was there with Melinda and they were stifling laughter. And it is what it is.
We're going to put a link to the video in the description. Bill and Melinda Gates
Yeah.
In an interview with a leading mainstream media American broadcaster.
Yeah.
When challenged about COVID and the choices people still had about whether or not to get jabbed and how serious it was, how pervasive it was, etc., Bill Gates said with a smirk on his face, please watch the video.
So we'll have to prepare for the next one. That, I'd say is will get attention this time.
Well, I don't know how seriously they took it, but they
It's
will
coming.
the
They're
next
gonna
one.
do another one,
And he
yeah.
smiled and smirked,
Yeah, and
knowing
Melinda did as
exactly
well.
what is coming.
Yeah, Melinda Gates as well laughed, and they genuinely see themselves as untouchable.
This
and
is
of
a man
course,
who's getting STDs from Russian prostitutes.
Yeah, everyone is compromised now. There is no one in office to vote for that isn't already bought and paid for. There is no one that you can.
I was just going to ask, taking it, there's a lot to unpack, and actually, I think I could speak to you for days, not hours.
Yeah, to be honest with you, I think with the Epstein files coming out, you're seeing a clear divide in humanity. And I've said to people, whose kids don't you love? If I was to see I don't know if you've got kids, if any of you got kids, I would look at them and love them. And you want to look after them and nurture them and protect them and teach them. Whose kids don't we love? Because people don't seem bothered because it's not their kids getting consumed.
I understand.
That's, to me, our people not running up and down the street ranting. That's what I feel like doing.
So did you see the video of the gentleman, the 2 days, I think it was, after the release of the Epstein files in the airport?
Yeah.
All of y'all are acting fucking normal. Epstein files have been released, and all of y'all are acting normal.
I feel like that every day.
It was me.
I feel like that every day.
Yeah, and I feel a great anger that everyone else doesn't feel like that, but I did about the vaccines.
Yeah.
And I felt a great anger that people never spoke out truthfully about that.
I bet you did.
It hasn't
I felt it
started,
about the
has
Panama Papers before that, John.
We're very different. We're wired very differently. A large swathe of humanity contains empathy and compassion, and they're not wired like us. They look the same. They walk and they talk, and we interact with them. But I think a large swathe of humanity has become NPCs. They just don't
I call
care.
them droids, but they are NPCs.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot is taken into account by people that do have the empathy. They do have the knowledge. Like you say, they know deep down.
Yeah.
Sadly, there's a pervasive cowardice of fear. People have become attached to their
There's a number
their
of
comfort
reasons,
and their jobs. And
100%. There's a number of reasons. When I worked on the door, if you encounter a violent situation, and I have many times, that you've got the fight or flight, haven't you? And then you've got the freeze one. Now, the freezing thing always confused me. When you get ladies who end up getting raped, or even blokes, bless them, and they say, well, why didn't you struggle? And I say, I don't know, I just froze. I couldn't run, I couldn't fight, and I froze. I never understood that. I'm seeing it now, though, where people, they know, but they just don't know what to do. So
that's the rabbit in the headlights. That's the deer in the headlights.
100%, yeah.
So for the benefit, because you are in a unique position of being uniquely informed in a way that most of the general public were not.
Yeah, I'm on the coal face. I know he's going in coffins because I put them in.
There you go. So I must ask, because this is extremely important, not just in terms of public health, but in terms of the truth and information which governs and augments people's understanding of the reality.
Of course.
Do you believe that COVID was brought in intentionally for the jabs to be recommended to people, much in the same way we had, you have false flag problems to bring in justification
100%.
for actions?
The great Rainer Fulmick, who's still in prison now for nothing, the crime of nothing, other than speaking the truth. He said it perfectly when he said the vaccines were never about COVID. COVID was about the vaccines.
So I say a lot, because people say a lot of the rules we had were confusion between masking up but eating, cutting a hole in it and playing an instrument. Yet you can go in and stand up and not wear a mask when you're sitting down. A lot of that, I said, all of the confusion you face is if you understand that COVID was brought in to justify a vaccine. The vaccine was not brought in for COVID.
It was all a big psyop to convince you of the need to be injected. And people talk about shedding. I'm not convinced about shedding. There's a number of reasons why, but one of them is common sense. Would you inject the vast population with stuff that might actually kill you? Of course you wouldn't. And that's why the emphasis was made on them being selfish, dangerous, can't work, can't travel.
Of course.
That's why, too, because it has to be injected. Otherwise, you risk killing yourself and your own bloodline.
Yes.
That's exactly why.
Like you.
It has to be injected. Yes, they are chemtrailing us. Yes, I don't doubt it's going in the food and water. But the main attack is the biological one via intravenous injection.
I could not agree more.
And when I was first privy to that meeting in Westminster, I was confided in me that the plan was 27 injections. And I remember at the time thinking...
Hang on, just for the user to take it back, is this the meeting with the police men?
No, this was with Graham Brady in Birdcage Walk in September of 2021. It opened avenues and doors for me, and people that I met at the meeting...
Just slow it down, tell us what happened.
Stayed in touch. So we went to this meeting, and it was felt... I was the only one there who wasn't didn't have letters after my name. You know, I'm just an undertaker, but it was felt that my testimony had relevance because of the field that I work in, about who's dying.
It does.
So we all sat there, and there were about 18 of us around the table, about 4 or 5, 6 each side, and then another half a dozen at the end of this huge long boardroom table in boardroom 1. And the table was about that thick, solid oak. I'd never sat at a table like that. I even knew they made tables like that. But there it was. And,
I call those clues of your surroundings when you're like,
yeah,
hold on.
do you know, it was the opulence was, I'd never, anyway, we all had a chance to speak. So Graham sat there, and I think Mark Saxton sat next to him. I had the late Anna Debisseray next to me. Lovely girl, bless her. Dolores Cale, Dr. Tess Laurie, a barrister called Francis Hoare sat there, Philip Hyland, the lawyer, someone to this side of me, I can't remember, but there was about 18. And we were impressed upon us that we had 5 minutes to 10 minutes at a maximum, because a minister's time is precious, you know. And so I'd condensed what I wanted to say. And back in 2021, it was a less evolved story than it is now, of course. I knew that they'd faked COVID deaths and monetized it. And I knew people only fell over when needles went in arms. That was where it was then, you know, and I relayed that. And then I listened as it went round the table. And I'll be honest with you, and I'll talk it as my arse fell out, because I listened to what they were saying.
Yeah.
And it was absolutely fucking devastating. They went into how people would die, the mechanisms, the cancers, the heart attacks.
Turbo cancers.
Yeah, sterility was mentioned as well. And everything is coming to pass. Everything is coming to pass. I think the only thing that I gauge from it is it not quite as effective as they hoped it be? Because they're holding off. And I'm wondering if perhaps there is tech in these jabs that will link up with the 5G and create adverse reactions for the next pandemic to unfold. And then it's, you know, and for example, the treatment in hospital, nobody ever questioned the treatment. It's there in front of you. Now, we're told that COVID was a respiratory illness and it destroys the lungs, you collapse, you die, you can't breathe. The only antiviral drug they would give people is one called remdesivir. Now, remdesivir was used extensively by Anthony Fauci in Africa. And do you ever remember the grand jury by Rainer Fulmick?
Yep.
I was on that. So the way that worked is they reach out to you, your testimony's considered valuable. And as they were doing it, they would give you a 3-hour slot to log in, you know. So they said, right, you're due to give your testimony on Tuesday between 6 and 9. Right. So a 3-hour slot. And sod's law, I log on, is the last hour. So I had 2 hours to listen to the previous 2 experts in their field. And one of them was on remdesivir. And he told me the history of remdesivir. And remdesivir was used by Anthony Fauci in Africa to treat asymptomatic babies who'd had a PCR test and tested positive for Ebola. Does it sound familiar? It was a practice run. So then he gave these babies who were asymptomatic remdesivir, and 53% of them died from multiple organ failure. Exactly the same as happened during COVID. Now, when I was picking these people up, the body bags were half full of fluid in a sealed body bag. I'd never seen that in 18 years, and I worked for the coroner. Half again as heavy. And I remember looking and thinking, how is there that much fluid coming out of these people? It's the remdesivir kills the kidneys. The body can't process fluid.
Oh,
so
wow.
You blow up and you drown. And when I was pulling these people out the bags to wash and dress them, they were crying yellow tears. They were bloated. All their fingers were puffed up. Every orifice was leaking edema.
Their kidneys weren't working.
Yeah, because they killed the kidneys,
and
suffered multiple organ failure. And as you die and you drown, there's your respiratory illness.
I was just going to say, what's going to happen if you...
Yeah, and you can Google. If you Google side effects of remdesivir, do it now. There'll be a number of links come up. A really good one is drugs.com because it talks in layman's terms.
Yeah.
You put the drug in, it will tell you what it does and the side effects and wheeziness, tight chest, difficulty breathing. Why would you give that to a respiratory patient?
Because you've got to create the symptoms that you're claiming.
Yeah, and then you get well weighed in, don't you?
Oh,
and I'm pretty sure that the doctors and nurses shouldn't be dancing and doing TikTok dances if they're over. And it's all, you know, when you're like, I can't believe people couldn't see it.
Well, one of the reasons we had you in for this introductory session, John, is because this is clearly an example of a longer form conversation which needs to happen. I have
Mate, I could talk for hours.
We're going to need you to.
I'm open to anyone who wants to debate me. I can tell you how they worked in COVID
I'm
wards.
exactly the same.
I was in there. I saw them doing it firsthand.
I've been called crazy for many years and shunned, and I wouldn't get the jab and not allowed into my doctors and dentists. I lost contracts and all sorts.
Yeah,
and then it's flipped 180, and now people call me for advice.
Yeah, of course.
There's a reason.
It's too late. It's too late. I can tell them NAC, nattokinase, bromelain is good because it inhibits the production of the spike proteins, these things. But ultimately, there's no cure. They said there's no cure.
I have been reading there are protocols to take, but you don't think there is?
You're managing the symptoms.
Right.
Your body has been genetically
colloidal gold, I'm told, is...
colloidal silver. So
no, I'm told colloidal gold is what is
yeah.
effective. Is that not the case?
Possibly, but no, it was never mentioned to me by any of the people sat at that table.
Wow.
But they did say that anyone who's had an active ingredient, they're finished. There's no cure. That's why we were so desperate. And Sir Graham Brady knew. You could see his face. It was ashen. He openly admitted it's way, way above his pay grade. And this is a man 2 pay grades above the Prime Minister.
And many people will be aware that, or not be aware, I should say, that there are even pay grades above.
I wasn't aware until that meeting. And we all sat there in the meeting and we were like, well, if he's 2 pay grades above the Prime Minister and the Prime Minister, that makes no sense. Yes, it does. There is no democracy. They're all installed.
Oh, of course. Yeah,
I never realised up until that point I was a professional undertaker.
If I may, just before we wrap up for part one, can I get some quick answers from you for questions which will support 2 and taking them apart?
100%.
So it's self-evident, as far as I'm concerned, particularly with hindsight, that those jabs were, the clot shots were unsafe. They actually checked the World Health Organization and CDC.
I'm pulling the pathology out daily.
Well, the Centre for Disease Control and World Health Organization changed the definition, as you may be aware, of what a vaccine was. And for that reason, so they could call it a vaccine. Now, I want to ask you a few things. Clearly, you've given examples of how the jab itself is causing clots, deaths, excess deaths, and a lot of these problems. I wanted to ask, number one, is that intentional, or is this all a cover job for the fact that jabs were rushed out and not safe, and it's a genuine error rather than a crime against humanity?
That's a really good one, and it goes into a deeper conversation that we could have. But the
we will. This is why I'm asking now.
Yeah, the question you're asking is why? Why are they doing it?
I've got my ideas. What's your opinion?
I've got one group of people that are very intellectual, who I shouldn't probably even be, but they respect my integrity, who think there's an impending Carrington event coming, and these people are aware. And they don't want to compete with the survivors for the resources that remain after the event. And
we had this conversation
key indicator
before
to that is the aurora borealis. As the magnetic field slips, you're going to see it further and further south. And what's been happening? We're seeing it further and further south. They know. We're
coming to the end of the cycle.
Like the film 2012, similar sort of thing, really. And that's why they're all... you have a look at the growth in the tunnelling industry in the last 10 years. Exponential growth. They're all investing in it because they're digging.
We had the conversation last summer. Everyone goes crazy in happiness. They can see the Northern Lights, and I'm saying that's not a good thing that you can see the Northern Lights in southeast England.
No, and
that's not good.
And they know, and they're projecting different areas that will survive it and outcome best. And if you think, and it's not 180 degrees to 90 degree switch. So wherever is on the equator will be 90 degrees. So they're constantly have computer programs, modeling, yes, running, guessing where is going to be safe, as you would if you had access to that kind of...
the effects of the forces
That's why they're doing the land grabs here and there.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to ask, is this the reason for the current volatility in geopolitics? War, the Iran stuff. Everyone's saying, why now? That's a 5,000-year-old, arguably longer
they've known
dispute,
for some time this was coming.
That the end is coming.
Yeah, so I was told one guy that reached out to me works in weapons, very senior, and he works in a specific area of weapons.
What do you mean, like a Raytheon, a Lockheed Martin?
Missiles.
Okay.
Missiles. And his field is alloys used in the thermal switches of these missiles.
Right.
And he said he knew war was coming because their back order is 5 years.
Wow.
And that was 3 years ago. So if Trump really is running out of missiles, there's none for sale because they haven't got the alloys. They haven't got none. There's none left. Everybody is buying it. It's all been bought. And he said to me, it's coming, and lo and behold, here we are.
What that makes a lot of sense. To ask you, what you were saying earlier about you're unsure about the power or how much the extent of the jab is currently killing people.
Yes.
What do you make of the idea, which I'm a proponent of, that it is there and the ingredients, whether or not you look at mRNA, graphene oxide, is it a situation which I've been told by a medically qualified doctor that his opinion is, I should say their opinion, is that it is designed to accentuate, and the thing that you're most health problematic with,
That's right.
to accentuate that problem due to inflammation
Yes.
of where those problems are, because all problems are
Cytokine
from
storm,
inflammation.
yeah. So-
Is that the case?
Yes, there are a number of different ways to do things, aren't there?
So if you have a predisposition for heart problem, it'll be that. If you have a predisposition for
yes,
arthritis,
yes.
whatever, it'll be
if
that.
you're in remission for cancer, it will
come back.
activate that
E-
T cell
exactly.
49, I think it is. So we're all developing cancer constantly throughout our body, and our immune system finds a cancerous cell and goes, get fucked, and it kills it. This gene therapy switches those T cells off. So that's why people are getting stage 4 cancer. And I see it in the funeral home where pre-COVID jab, cancer would have a cancer story. And those people, I'd get to know them because it's me from the first phone call to the day of the funeral. And that cancer story would be 2 years, 5 years, 10 years long. Now it's 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks, because they've genetically modified these people to die that quickly from it. And a lot of the cancers that were being called out, we're opening them up, and it's not cancer, it's white fibrous clots throughout their lungs, for example. Now, if you think, if you present to the doctor because you feel unwell and you're short of breath, and they do a scan, they say, I'm afraid you've got stage 4 terminal cancer and you're short of breath, are you going to call them a liar? Or are you going to get your affairs in order?
No.
That's what happens. And then I embalm and I find all the white crap inside their lungs. So they might have been told it's lung cancer. They might believe it's lung cancer. It ain't.
Okay. I think we should probably defer to part 2, where we are going to cover not just the purpose, but the data. I'm an expert in data analysis.
Then you'll know.
Flu became non-existent while COVID was
That's
prevalent.
right. Yeah. It's
Literally
only a year in
non-existent.
18 years, there's been not one single...
That's correct.
Yeah. They did whatever they could. I even had families come to me who were offered money to allow the doctors to put COVID on the death certificate. And that money they were offered was obviously a slice of whatever they were getting. So they still earned money out of it, but the family had a little sweetener. And of course, you get a family with fuck all who ain't got no money for a funeral, they're going to take that money.
I happen to know someone in my personal life who was hit by a bus. They were late 70s. They were run over by a bus, and their cause of death was COVID.
Yeah, tire mark. I've had one in tire marks across the chest. It was a COVID death. Yeah.
So what my question is, and what we're going to explore in part 2 with John, why would NHS trusts be taking money? But why? What I'm asking is, why are we needing to pay NHS trusts if that's the reality of the situation?
A lot of the doctors that I've spoken to could not believe their luck initially. You know, here was this endless plethora of money rolling in, and they were all getting the Porsche Boxsters their missus wouldn't let them buy.
Yeah.
It's money. It's money.
And why would that be necessary if it wasn't fraudulent?
And then, you know, how many outcomes do you see that you can't talk about because you'll get hammered like Dr. David Cartland or Asim Malhotra or Mohammed Adil? Their careers are ended. So they don't. They all stay quiet and they'll wait for someone else to do it, you know, and it's not happening, is it?
So, no, and as a roundup for that, so that people may understand the brevity and weight and the importance of what we are discussing here as a crime against humanity.
Yes.
You saw with your, forget what we're told, forget the media, John, you saw with your own eyes a difference pre-2019 or 2020, and then you saw this.
I see all of it. I see the pathology. I see the testimony of other funeral directors. I've spoken to doctors. I've sat in the meetings in Westminster. I've sat in more Zoom meetings with more people. I've spoken to RFK Jr. I've spoken to Alex Jones. I've spoken to Gareth Ike. I've spoken to loads of people. I know.
David Ike's actually coming on
this
show.
I like him. He's a good guy. Well, he comes across as a good guy. I don't know him, you know.
No, of course. So I just may, if I may, I was struck initially by being told hospitals were overwhelmed, medical facilities were overwhelmed, to turn on the news and engage with why they were overwhelmed and saw empty wards with dancing nurses.
Yeah, of course.
Now, I'm not saying that's a reason to point to it. I'm saying that some people started asking questions. My question to you before we wrap up, just so that people may understand and then see what we're going to go into for part 2. if we have Robert Malone, who is a patent holder for mRNA technology.
Saturn means with him, yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, or Mike, there you go. Or Mike Yeadon, the ex-CEO of respiratory research at Pfizer.
He emailed me 2 days ago.
Oh, wow. So
So a lot of them have reached out to me because of the circles that I've kept. And there's nothing remarkable about me except in their eyes.
No, but my
integrity,
question to you is for the people that don't have this kind of information, insight, or critical thinking, if we have luminaries like those I've just mentioned, the clarity of hindsight, everything you've said, your testimony, the medical information we have, and people still are of the opinion of what the mainstream mothers told them. What do you think has got to happen for those people to understand where they are in their lives for the benefit of their families?
I think many of them are not going to. They're going to die convinced it's because you won't have yours.
Right, so they're just too far gone, you
Yeah,
might say.
so whether there's like some sort of syndrome, isn't there? Stockholm syndrome, where you bond with your attacker or you're in denial. But I can tell you, it doesn't matter what they think. Nothing will change the pathology I'm pulling out of people. I'm seeing it on a regular basis. I've sat with very eminent people in very eminent meetings. It's undeniable. It's not up for denial. There's no question in my mind what's going to happen. And at some point, they will come for us again with injections.
Yes,
they're coming.
There is a second pre-planned pandemic coming.
Yeah, there is.
And on that note, I would welcome all of you to tune in on part 2 for John O'Looney's interview, where we go in depth into sources, the nature of COVID, dissenting voices, what happened, the vilification, the strange rules, and how it fits into the very present reality of the uncertainty of today's reality. John, this introduction has been a pleasure, and I cannot wait to have you back. Thank you for being a hero and a force for good.
Do you know what? It's one of them things where I am in my office. It's in a little cluster of shops, and opposite me there's a community centre. I've got the little old girls, Blue Rinse Brigade hairdressers next door, and a local shop. And in the community centre, they run a preschool nursery. And these kids, I've been there 10 years. I go in there, these kids wave to me and they smile and they laugh, and I watch them skip in. There's no way on earth I'm ever going to be involved in anything that would harm a child.
Well,
ever.
that's something we're going to get into, the satanic ritual abuse and what we found in the Epstein files and how that relates to
really
COVID.
Grim. It's really grim, and the organ harvesting and everything else. And there's a passage in the Bible, Ecclesiastes 1:18. I've never been particularly religious, but it reads, with knowledge comes sorrow, and with a greater wisdom comes a greater grief.
Oh, wow.
And it's bang on the money.
That is bang on the money. That took my breath away. And if we may end on the favourite of mine for these modern times, which you may like, as soon as God made black, as sure as God made black and white, what is done in the dark will be brought to the light.
100%. 100%. That's the thing is what defines us is not the colour of our skin or our DNA or our faith. It's our conduct. That's what defines us.
Even if you're called crazy for being right. Please come back for part 2, where we unwrap everything that John O'Looney has got to say, why he's got to say it, and what he found. Thank you.